That was almost the best timed anything I think I've ever done. Welcome back to another episode of the Deductionist Podcast, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are all fine and dandy this merry evening. Cards on the table. We are going out on Instagram Live as well at the minute. All of that will make sense as part of the story when you hear about everything that's happened over the last couple of days. So we need to get this out right from the get-go. I'm not the most technically minded person in the world, as anyone that's ever trained with me will be able to tell you. So things could go wrong, right? So we're going to see what happens with this. So for those of you that aren't currently following me on Instagram, let me give you the story. Let me try and dress it up a little bit for you. You will all be aware that Louis Theroux walked into the Manosphere with a camera and a quiet voice, and then what he found wasn't a movement of strong men at all. It was just a room full of people who'd stopped thinking and just replaced it with certainty. And so what I did was I made a video in response to one of the guys, Justin Waller. I made a response to the video that he made, and it kind of went a little bit mental. My first viral notch on the belt, as it were. So the story evolved. The arguments were rife. Hi, Julie. The arguments were rife, and hey, Karate Elvis, nice to see you. It all kind of devolved into the reason for this, right? And if you followed the Deductionist Podcast for any moment of time, you know that we are a little bit obsessed with Sherlock Holmes here. And I think it's safe to say that when it comes to this Manosphere problem, Holmes would have had the whole thing solved in about 10 minutes. This episode is us just doing that work, okay? So Act 1, if you want to think of it that way, will be very much the prosecution, and then Act 2 will be more the classroom part of it. So by the end, if you stick around for the whole thing, you'll be leaving with the tools to think more clearly than anyone you'll argue with online today. Not that that's ever going to be the goal of anyone that's having arguments online. I'm merely looking to remark on the fact that there is a distinct lack of thinking with these boys. Okay. Within one particular argument, there were 10 talking points that were really dismantling the Manosphere's founding lie through evidence, history, and a Holmesian method, right? So I put those 10 talking points into what we're going to go through here. It makes it easier to remember, and then we can go through the whole thing as we move forward on it, right? So question number 1 then becomes, what does the Manosphere have in common with every bad theory that Holmes has ever dismantled? And that one in question starts with a conclusion and works backwards. You know, the whole men built the world idea isn't an observation, it's a premise. And then everything that follows it, you know, the cherry-picked inventors, the dismissal of women's contributions, the rooftop declarations, it's confirmation bias that's very much dressed up as logic. Holmes's foundational rule was the opposite. Quick question. When was the last time you trusted your memory? But your memory without checking a device. Most people don't lose intelligence. They lose discipline of attention. MindForge is a structured training system that is designed to rebuild focus, recall, and your mental stamina, but to do so in just 10 minutes a day. No productivity hacks, no dopamine tricks, no supplements you need to swallow, just cognitive conditioning. So if you want your mind to feel sharper within a week, omniscient-insights.com/MindForge, or right there. Train your mind like it matters. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Never theorize before you have data. The moment you do, you start twisting facts to fit the theory rather than letting the theory emerge from the facts itself. Now, with the videos that came out around this, it wasn't really a gender argument. It was an epistemological one. The Manosphere doesn't have a facts problem. It has a methods problem. Bear with me. Festinger's cognitive dissonance research. It demonstrates that when a belief is tied to identity, contradicting evidence doesn't update the belief. It triggers defensive processing, which we've seen arguably all the time, right? So the stronger the emotional investment, the more aggressively the mind rejects the disconfirming data. The Manosphere isn't necessarily reasoning badly. It's not reasoning at all. It's just protecting the ideologies that it's developed up until that stage. All right. Point 2. What does Justin Waller's rooftop moment actually demonstrate? What was that whole video in response to as a case study in reactive thinking? Right. Now, this bit I found out after from all of the comments, because forgive me as an ignorant Englishman, I don't know Miami very well. Okay, so he's standing on a Miami rooftop, and Waller asks Louis, and by extension the world, to name one thing a woman has built or invented. And as it transpires, the building that is visible from his rooftop, 1000 Museum, 62 stories, was designed by Zaha Hadid. Good afternoon, Paolo, on Instagram. Welcome. Right, so the internet is also carrying his broadcast. It runs on Radia Perlman's spanning tree protocol. The frequency hopping in his phone is Hedy Lamarr's 1942 patent. The trading infrastructure underpinning most of his income, or whatever it was that he spoke about, was really shaped by Muriel Siebert. Adina Freeman and Abigail Johnson, also in there with computer development and crypto assets and the like. He was asking the question while quite literally standing on the answer. Now, I think it's fair to say that Holmes wouldn't have found this impressive. He would have found it instructive, as in, this is what happens when you react before you observe. You ask a question that you've already decided the answer to, and the evidence just sits there, quietly embarrassing you. All right? From a scientific background, well, really more psychological and neuroscientific than anything, there is the attribution error afoot. This is really the psychological tendency to explain outcomes through character while ignoring a situational context. That's really the engine here. Most researchers in this field find it especially pronounced when the conclusion flatters the observer's in-group. All right. If you want to look at in-group, out-group, there is a guy on Instagram who I adore in terms of the things that he talks about. It's called the Brain Salad Surgery podcast. Wonderful man, very insightful. Anyway, essentially what it is in this moment is the brain doesn't see what it's looking for. All right. Then we move to the next thing that these clever clogs supposedly spoke about. It was, why don't we know these women's names? What does that tell us about the reliability of the historical record that the Manosphere draws from? The erasure is documented. Science historian Margaret Rossiter named it the Matilda effect in 1993. which was the systematic bias through which women's contributions are attributed to male colleagues, stripped from records, or never credited at all. It's a sad state of affairs, right? Let me, Paolo's got a question. Are there questions you cannot even have a hint of the answer by observation? Like, just an example, you ask yourself about someone's job, and for some reason, nothing gives you a clue in this sense. Yes, that's an internal bias. It's an internal panic. There's always information there. It just needs to be explored. All right, but forgive me, Paolo. We're gonna stay on topic with this at the minute. If there's time at the end, we'll maybe come back to it as well. 1993, Rosalind Franklin's X-ray crystallography gave Watson and Crick the structure of DNA. Lise Meitner co-discovered nuclear fission and coined the term. Otto Hahn won the Nobel. She didn't. The Manosphere is citing a history that was deliberately edited and then calling it evidence, right? Holmes never trusted a witness who had a reason to lie. He would have asked, who wrote this history? And what did they stand to gain from it? The record is not neutral. Sourcing your argument from a biased record and then calling it fact is not deduction. It's credulity. Yes, Julie. Anna Burgess, who changed the entire way that criminals are interrogated, right? The list goes on. We can connect this here to social identity theory. It shows that in-group members instinctively protect narratives that elevate group status, often without conscious intent. The Matilda effect, it wasn't always malice. Sometimes it was just institutions, textbooks, and Nobel committees doing what all in-groups do, just remembering their own. Karate Elvis. I remember there being more positive men's activists like Matt McKay from The Art of Manliness years before Andrew Tate and his clones. I almost sadly then don't know who Matt McKay is, but if he was a positive role model in that arena, then more power to him. More power to him. Point number 4. What happens when you actually answer the Manosphere's challenge? Right? So why does the argument never end? Or seemingly never end? There's been a plethora, a myriad of women names throughout this. Lamar, Lovelace, Perlman, Franklin, Somerville, and then the goalposts move. Suddenly it's name 10. You name 10 and it becomes, but not in engineering. You cover engineering and it becomes, but not at the same level. You then demonstrate the same level and it becomes, but they had help, right? This is not debate. It's barely even a discussion. This is a logical fallacy with a name. Moving the goalposts. That's the deliberate shifting of the criteria for success the moment the original criteria are met. It's one of the most reliable signs that the argument was never actually about the evidence in the first place, and it is rife. Not just in the Manosphere, but right the way across right-wing ideological discourse, wherever inconvenient facts begin to land. Holmes would have spotted this almost immediately, because it's exactly the behavior of a guilty suspect, not an innocent one, right? And an innocent man welcomes new evidence. A guilty one keeps changing the charge. When someone moves the goalposts, the moment that you score, the question is no longer about the facts. It's about what they are protecting. Anyone seeing any replication with a certain collection of files? these maps, or rather this maps precisely onto what Festinger documented. Dissonance, it's not resolved by updating the belief, it's resolved by restructuring the test. McAdams, narrative identity work, it showed that when a myth is threatened, the mind adds conditions until the myth becomes unfalsifiable. An unfalsifiable belief ain't a belief at all. It's a fortress, right? Holmes knew the only way to get in is to ask the question that they can't answer. Like simply asking what evidence would actually change your mind. If the answer's nothing, then the conversation was never about truth in the first place. Right? Point number 5 is the logic of name 10 women as great as insert whatever they want to here actually a logical argument? No. It's a record of access, not ability. You cannot produce a female JP Morgan in an era when women were legally prohibited from owning a bloody bank account. You can't produce female composers as good as Bach from a century when women were forbidden from publishing under their own names. Don't believe me? Ask Hildegard von Bingen. I know you can't, but that's just me being trite. Karate Elvis, I did not see your comment on the Bartitsu video. I will go back and check it out when this is done. I didn't see it. Apologies. I'll check it out as soon as I get an opportunity. Moving on from Hildegard, look at the word scientist. The word scientist didn't exist until 1834, when it was coined specifically to describe Mary Somerville, because man of science wasn't broad enough to contain what she was. The question assumes a level playing field that has never existed. And the Iceland, right? A couple of messages asking me about that afterwards. The Iceland remark I made in the video, sorry. The Iceland test, to me, closes the argument entirely, right? Iceland has led the WEF Global Gender Gap Index for 16 consecutive years. They're the only country to have closed over 90% of its gender gap. The closer barriers fall, the smaller the output gap becomes. Biology doesn't respond to policy reform. Oppression does. I believe I said those exact things in the video. Right? Holmes was meticulous about the conditions of the problem before he ever attempted to solve it. You cannot solve a case if you've misread the scene. So asking who won a race where one competitor was chained to the wall is not an analysis. It's a kind of theater almost, right? If you look at the gender gap report from 2025, I've not looked at 2026, obviously, but it confirms that Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, the 4 countries with the highest gender equality scores, also show the smallest measurable gaps in economic participation and professional output between men and women. That pattern, that holds across 16 consecutive years of data. If the performance gap were biological, it would be constant. It isn't. It just tracks access. All right. There was a few people also referencing Hedy Lamarr in that it's a lie going around that she didn't invent Wi-Fi. Right? She proves that competence and visibility are not the same thing. Hetty, as far as I could find out, she spent her nights at a drafting table. She studied the anatomy of the fastest fish, the fastest birds. She sketched aerodynamic wing designs and then presented them to Howard Hughes, who then in turn gave her a team of scientists to implement them. All right. She had a co-patent with George Antheil, number 2292387. It's the architectural blueprint for frequency hopping, right? The US Navy used her exact logic during the Cuban Missile Crisis. She is in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. When commenters insist that she had no technical knowledge whatsoever, they're not engaging with historical record. They are performing the Matilda effect live in real time in a comment section, right? Holmes would say, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Lamar's patent is in the public record. The Navy's implementation is documented. The only way to maintain that she had no technical knowledge is to eliminate the evidence, which is not deduction, it's denial. Again, going back to Festinger's dissonance framework, it predicts exactly this response. When a single, clear counterexample threatens a foundational belief, the mind doesn't revise. It just discredits the source. Genius. Lamar isn't ignored because she's unimportant. She's dismissed because she's seemingly inconvenient. All right? Oh, this one annoyed me. I'll be honest with you. I'm an avid reader, in spirit anyway, when I get the time to actually sit down and go through it. Comment. I remember a lifting historian, Jamie Lewis, making a remark that men through history sought to be more manly due to a result of losing in wars and needing to prove their manliness. Christ. I mean, if that's true, that's terrible. That's terrible. All right. But this one I was going to mention. What does Andrew Tate's position on reading? What does it reveal about how parts of the Manosphere actually think? Strong coffee is definitively needed, Julie. All right. So from the videos I saw, Tate claimed that reading is for slow minds, that his brain moves doing this, that his brain moves too fast for books. This is the intellectual architecture of the Manosphere, just stated plainly. It's experience over evidence, sensation over understanding, speed over depth. When will it be over? When I feel it in my bones. Neuroscience tells us the opposite. Yeah? Deep reading builds white matter in the prefrontal cortex. That is the seat of long-term strategy, critical thinking, and your impulse regulation. Ringing true, right? Every general, every emperor, every architect of real lasting power that the Manosphere venerates was an obsessive reader. They didn't read because they were slow. They read because they understood that experience, yes, I think I said this in the video, experience gives you scars, reading gives you a map, yet it is both that puts you at an advantage higher than most. Right? Holmes was one of the most widely read men in Victorian fiction. He studied chemistry, law, music theory, anatomy, criminal history. His edge wasn't instinct and feeling. It was accumulated knowledge that looked like instinct. Telling boys to skip that process isn't a fast lane to power. It's just a guaranteed way to remain outmaneuvered by anyone who actually did the reading. And the science behind it is Festinger's engine once again. All right. If your identity is built on being a superior thinker, admitting that deep reading builds superior thinking and that you've publicly rejected it, That creates an unbearable contradiction, right? So the solution there isn't to read. It's to redefine reading as weakness. It's a lifestyle branded lobotomy. It's just an attempt to make followers easier to lead and make it harder for them to think for themselves. Point 8 is the pain that drives young men into the manosphere real? And does Holmes have anything to say about that? Simply put, yes, the pain is real that drives them there. Young men are experiencing genuine loneliness, identity confusion, and a profound sense of purposelessness. If you look at some of the research that was published in Child and Adolescent Mental Health in 2025, it confirms that the manosphere exploits this, spreading dangerous messages about mental health while filling a vacuum that nobody else was filling loudly enough to be heard. The manosphere didn't manufacture the wound, it just got there first with the wrong diagnosis and a very loud prescription. Holmes never dismissed the emotional reality of a case. He just refused to let emotion determine the conclusion of it. Right? The correct response to real pain is not to validate whatever explanation arrives first and then just shout the loudest. What we need to be doing in that situation is to ask, is this diagnosis actually supported by the evidence that we have? Or does it just feel good because it gives someone else something to blame? We're at Tedgefeld and Turner's framework again, showing that when mainstream culture fails to provide young men with a clear, dignified identity narrative, they don't drift. They actively search. The manosphere itself has a very loud answer, and it's ready. It's not a moral failure of young men. It's a predictable outcome of an identity vacuum being filled by the most confident voice in the room, regardless of whether or not that voice is right. Yeah, Karate Elvis, that's very worth saying. Heck, I'm 29 years old and still trying to figure out what kind of man I want to be, still trying to find myself. My friend, I'm 40 this year. So am I. Right? So am I. I keep having these ideas. I mean, never mind what they've done to Stoicism, but I keep having these ideas that pop back in that help me, and it's the worry not about what a good man does, be one. That speaks to me. Just thought I'd share that with you. Where was I? Number 9. Yes, Julie. It's sad, but they do. Right, number 9. If the lie of the manosphere is this visible, why does it persist? So what does that tell us about how the mind works under identity threat? Yeah, because accepting the evidence, it costs something real. Accepting that Hedy Lamarr built the logic in your phone, that Ada Lovelace wrote the first algorithm, that Radia Perlman designed the internet's backbone, it means that accepting that the scoreboard was always wrong to begin with. And if the scoreboard was wrong, the identity that you've built on top of it has to be rebuilt as well, right? That's not an intellectual exercise. That's a kind of grief process. Good evening. Good evening. To Instagram. This is so weird. This is so weird, streaming to all of these places at once. All right. So it's fair to say that the manosphere doesn't lack information, or at least the opportunity to gain it. What it lacks is the psychological safety to receive it. All right. Let me wax lyrical for a moment about Holmes. As is my wont, being a massive dork. Irene Adler. the only person who ever truly beat Sherlock Holmes. Didn't outmuscle him, she outthought him. Holmes, to his credit, acknowledged it. He called her the woman for the rest of his life, not as an insult, but as recognition. That capacity to update, to revise, to let the evidence change your conclusion, even when it humbles you, that's the actual mark of a sharp mind. Manosphere doing the opposite. It's a little something called scapegoat theory. It shows that when internal failure feels unbearable, groups externalize causality. The real enemy is not the scapegoat. It's the terror of having to revise who you think you are. All right? She who shall not be named. Indeed. Indeed. All right? And then point number 10. What does it actually cost men, not women, men, to buy into this life? Everything it promises to give them. The manosphere tells young men to reject reading, to reject nuance, to reject the evidence of women's contribution, and then to double down on a myth of dominance that requires them to stay incurious and reactive and intellectually fragile. That is not strength. Holmes was the most capable man in the room, in almost every scene. And he got there by observing before concluding, by reading everything, by revising constantly, and having the intellectual honesty to tip his hat to people that knew something he didn't, or could outthink him, like Irene Adler. All right? Let me say this. And Julie, if you're still listening, this is very much inspired by your observation in the community the other day. True strength is never a performance. It is a state of being. There is a profound psychological law that's at play in the human social hierarchy. Authority is inversely proportional to volume. I'm going to try and say that again. Authority is inversely proportional to volume. So when you see someone yelling, demanding respect, or asserting their dominance through noise, you are not witnessing power. You are witnessing a confession of its absence. To demand something is to admit you do not currently possess it. Right? My monitor's about to go off. I knew something had happened. The Stoics called this the inner citadel. And it's the understanding that your character and your worth are entirely within your own jurisdiction. So if you need the world to acknowledge your strength in order for it to exist, then you've just handed your leash to the world. You are no longer the master. You are a reactor. And psychologically, a raised voice is a stress response. It is the sound of the amygdala taking over. It signals to everyone in the room that you've just lost control of the variables, and more importantly, that you've lost control of yourself. This is why the most influential person in any room is often the quietest. They operate with low entropy. They don't need to fill the space with sound because their presence already occupies it. When you are truly capable, you have nothing to prove. You know, I think it's something like a lion doesn't need to roar at a mouse to establish the hierarchy. The hierarchy is inherent in their nature. So if you have to tell people who you are, you aren't that person yet. Real power is the ability to remain still while the world around you is in chaos. It's the choice to speak only when your words are more valuable than the silence they break. It is the quiet confidence of a person who knows that their value is a fact, not a negotiation. True strength is the still point of the turning world. It doesn't move, it doesn't shout, and it never has to ask permission to exist. The men that this manosphere venerate as icons have built nothing that lasted. Do men who built things that lasted thought like Holmes? Mustafa's writing a monograph. Amazing. I look forward to reading it. Be sure to share it in the community if you want to, whenever it's ready. Can't tease something like that and expect it to go unanswered. All right. So with that, you can't build anything real on a foundation that requires you to ignore half the architects. Humanity spent 2,000 years benching half its best players. The Manosphere is asking us to keep them on the bench and call that strength. Right? Holmes would call it what it is: a failure of observation just dressed up as a worldview. There was a 2024 piece of research published in the Journal of Gender Studies that tracked young men's entry points into the Manosphere and found that vulnerability, not aggression, was the first door they worked through. The rage, the anger, comes later. The loneliness comes first. Now, the Holmesian approach in this situation, it's not contempt. It's clarity. You understand the mechanism and then reject the myth. You just teach people to think. That's the whole show. All right? So, moving into Act 2. There are 4 teaching points we can look at. The fallacy toolkit, how bias enters undetected, how to audit your own thinking, and the Holmesian method as a kind of daily practice, right? So we've had the 10 fallacies, yeah? But how do you recognize them in the wild? The comment section underneath the clip, I mean, they were arguably textbook. 10 documented logical fallacies, all present, all of them real, right? So we've got survivorship bias, which is scoring output while ignoring who's barred from the building. You've got false equivalence, which is treating enforced exclusion and innate ability as the same variable. You've got an appeal to nature, which is dressing up a social outcome in biological language to make it sound inevitable. We're moving the goalposts, we've done. You've got ad hominem in these situations when you attack the person instead of continuing the argument. You've got a composition fallacy, which is using the group achievement to claim individual superiority. You've got a false dichotomy, which is framing a complex reality as a this or this, a binary element. You've got the Texas sharpshooter, which is cherry picking only the categories where dominance is most visible and then calling that selection universal. Then you've got an argument from silence. When someone can't pick something up from their memory, it's treated as an absence from history. It just means they can't remember it. And then you've got Mott and Bailey, which is changing between a defensible weak claim and an indefensible strong one. You retreat to the weak one when you're challenged, and you advance to the strong one when you're not. Holmes catalogued every form of deception he encountered. And from what it was written, it wasn't to feel superior, but it was so he could never be fooled by the same trick twice. Here's the truth. Clarity under pressure isn't natural. It's trained. Axiom is a cognitive framework, one that is designed to improve your reasoning, to improve your memory, and then the subsequent decision making that goes along with that. Not theory focused, not just inspirational quotes, mental architecture. So if you want to think clearly and do so when it counts, go to omniscient-insights.com/axiom, or right there. Because in chaos, the clear thinker wins. That's the purpose of naming these fallacies, not to win arguments. It's like fights. Nobody really wins a fight. Nobody really wins an argument. It's to inoculate yourself against them, in other people's reasoning and in your own. Right? If you look at research from the International Center for Counterterrorism, you're in my wheelhouse now, confirms that logical fallacies in extremist content aren't accidental. They're structural. It's content engineered to keep people in reactive emotional states, specifically using false dichotomies, appeals to nature, and arguments from silence, because these exploit System 1 thinking before System 2 ever has time to engage. Naming the pattern is the first line of defense. All right? And smart people keep falling for bad arguments. We did a podcast on that a while back. And then it's really looking at what Daniel Kahneman from Thinking Fast and Slow, the book about Type 1 and Type 2 thinking, what does he tell us about that? Because intelligence isn't protection, right? This guy's got decades of research that's just consolidated within that book, and it's identified 2 cognitive systems that govern how we process information. System 1, fast, automatic, emotional, runs like 95% of the time. System 2, slow, deliberate, analytical, expensive, right? So the brain resists using it. The Manosphere, specifically engineered for System 1. Confident delivery, simple binaries, emotional provocation, repetition. Oh, Mustafa, there's tons in Stoicism about only connecting to the truth, mate. But if you look at all of those elements from the Manosphere materials, each of them's a System 1 trigger. So by the time System 2 activates, if it activates at all, the emotional conclusion's already formed, and System 2's job becomes rationalizing it rather than evaluating it. Kahneman called it a confirmation bias loop. So System 1 forms the impression, System 2 finds the evidence in that order, not the other way around. Holmes operated almost entirely in System 2 by design and by discipline. He imposes delay between observation and conclusion. He refused first impressions. He treated his own emotional reactions as data to be examined, not instructions to be followed. Right? That is learnable. It's also effortful, which is exactly why the Manosphere tells boys, don't bother, right? Because it takes some time, some pain, some effort. Kahneman estimated that around 96% of our thinking runs through System 1. Or 95, whatever I said earlier. It's in the high 90s. Sue me, I haven't remembered the entire book, right? His research shows that even experts, doctors, judges, psychologists, financial analysts, they're subject to systematic System 1 errors in complex modern contexts for which our cognitive hardware is not evolved. So the settings where System 1 performs best are fast, familiar, low stakes. Online ideological content is specifically designed to simulate those conditions while delivering high stakes conclusions. So how do you audit your own thinking then? And what is the Holmes pre-mortem? The single most powerful question in critical thinking is one the Manosphere structurally prevents its followers from asking. What evidence would change my mind? If you can't answer that question, if no conceivable fact or study or counterexample would shift your position, you are not holding a belief. You're holding a fortress. The Holmes pre-mortem is the habit of asking that question before you argue, not after. Before you post, before you share, before you double down, name the thing that would prove you wrong. If you can name it, you are reasoning. If you can't, you are defending. Now, there is a second audit question that's equally important. It is, am I reacting or am I observing? If you felt the conclusion before you examine the evidence, go back. Start again. Observe first and conclude second. Every time. Right? Holmes's genius was not that he never had intuitions. It was more that he treated his intuitions as hypotheses, right? Not verdicts. He stress tested them. He looked for disconfirming evidence first. He was, in his own words, suspicious of theories that fit too perfectly because reality is rarely convenient. The pre-mortem is that suspicion, but it's just formalized into a habit. Metacognition, which is the ability to think about your own thinking. It's a measurable, trainable skill. Right? If you look up the cognitive reflection test, it shows that individuals who pause before answering and interrogate their first instinct consistently outperform those who act on immediate intuition, even on questions where both groups have equivalent knowledge. Right? That pause is not a weakness. It's a mechanism. One of the things that you never see within these arguments, ever, is where is it going? All right? There's noise going back and forth, but to what end? Does anyone really know? And if you look at the videos where this type of behavior is celebrated, someone's being yelled at or some kind of clickbait argument is coming around, and it's just noise being parroted back and forth. When you're watching this, are you watching the noise and looking at the isolated points, or do you know the end that the argument is apparently going towards? Invariably, the answer is no, because it's never even on the table. It's about how loud the other person can speak. All right? Julie says, I'd sit them with intelligent women and simply observe silently. Oh, wouldn't that be delicious to watch? That would be incredible. All right. So what does the Holmes method actually look like as a daily practice? And you could argue then, based on that, Julie, that Irene Adler is the proof of concept. Right? The Holmesian method is not a personality type. It's a practice. You observe before concluding. You treat your emotional reactions as data, not something to follow. You update your position when the evidence demands it, even when it costs you. You are to seek disconfirming evidence specifically, because your mind will find confirming evidence automatically. Name the fallacy when you see it. Not to humiliate the person, but to locate the flaw in the argument. Ask what evidence would change your mind before you defend your position. And when you are wrong, and it will happen, tip your hat. Acknowledge it cleanly. Move on. Irene Adler beat Holmes not because she was stronger or louder or more aggressive. She beat him because she out-observed him. She read the room before he read her. Holmes didn't rage at being beaten by a woman. He just revised his model of what a formidable opponent looked like. He called her the woman, singular, because she'd earned it through evidence. That response, that update, that clean acknowledgement, that's the whole practice in one moment. The Manosphere's version of strength requires you to never be wrong, never update, never acknowledge a counterexample, and never tip your hat. That is not strength. That is rigidity. And rigidity, as Holmes knew better than anyone, is the thing that breaks under pressure. Adaptability, intellectual adaptability, Emotional evidence. That's what holds. McAdams is Ain't that the truth, Julie? Ain't that the truth? Because these men, one-on-one, no public, are very often not the same people, right? McAdams' narrative identity research shows that people who hold their self-narrative lightly, who can incorporate new evidence without some kind of existential threat, they demonstrate significantly greater psychological resilience and cognitive flexibility than those for whom self-narrative is fixed. The willingness to update is not a sign of a weak mind. It is the defining characteristic of a strong one. It is, in the end, what separates the detective from the suspect. Right? When you have the capacity to observe before concluding, to update when the evidence demands it, to hold your beliefs lightly enough that the truth can actually get in. That's not a weakness. That is the sharpest thing a mind can do. Teach clarity. Clarity, in the end, is the only thing that actually holds out. All right? So I've kind of gone on a little longer than I intended to, but there was a lot of points I wanted to make. Thank you to everyone that joined in. Consider these my final words on these idiots, mostly because I don't want them clogging up my feed anymore. Okay? And to Instagram, hello and goodbye very soon. Thank you for joining in. This podcast episode will be out in a finished version tomorrow, available from wherever you get your podcast episodes from. If you follow along on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can watch all of these live when they come out. Instagram, you'll get updated of these too, so if you're not following along on here, be sure to do that. I'm not sure how often I'll be able to do this kind of setup, if it even works, if you're even getting anything out of the whole Instagram live setup. You have to let me know. Okay, so with that in mind, I shall love you and leave you, and I'll see you again very soon.